Thank you so much, Ambhavi. And thank you, welcome. I know there are many interesting conversations happening simultaneously, but thank you for coming to this venue. And I think Ravina is really a very interesting woman. She's a socio-cultural anthropologist. This book, Searching for the Songbird, is, it's at many layers, but on the surface, it is for young readers. So Ravina, you have been working extensively, whether it was Ford Foundation and now the Columbia University. It's been a lot of serious work that you've been doing on the mountains, and another passion I'll come to a bit later. Starting off with this book, what inspired you to write a book for young readers? And searching for the songbird, even within that, there's a catch about the songbird, right? So let's just start with why this book and where did it come from?
I just want to start by saying welcome to everybody, but thank you. It's just so wonderful to be here. The energy is unbelievable, right? We all feel it. And thank you, Puneeta, for that question. So I've thought about why. Most of my career, I've been a nonfiction writer.
Right.
As an academic. I research, I write, I'm expected to write. But I've been an avid reader, and in the last 15 years, not being solely as a faculty member or a researcher, I've spent a lot of time at the Ford Foundation and now at Columbia building platforms for bringing research and writing out into the public domain. So I didn't have a lot of time for taking my own research into a book format in the recent years. I have in the past, because it requires time, as you know it.
Yeah.
Not that fiction doesn't require time, but it's really my happy place. So I went to my happy place where I've grown up reading mysteries. I think a lot of us in my generation also, whether it's Enid Blyton
Absolutely.
or Nancy Drew or Alfred Hitchcock's Three Investigators, Agatha Christie. So grew up with a lot of literature by British and American writers that was, about mysteries. And I longed, even at that time, being an only child for a few years before my sisters were born, to create that sense of community where there were friends and you went around having these adventures, in the countryside, away from the urban areas. So I think that longing, I went back to that. So that's one reason I chose to write a mystery, and one reason I chose to write about that age, aim it for that age group, because it was such a happy place. And of course, the second, when I thought of writing it, all my writing that has been substantial has been about the Himalaya, where I started work as an anthropologist over 34 years ago. So it was natural to me then to set the book in the mountains, and so that's how it started.
Great. So, it's a very interesting mystery thriller where these four young people get together. There's Johnny, who's actually Janvi Rawat?
Jahan. Jannat. His name is Jannat.
Jannat.
Yeah, which is
right.
Significant. Yeah.
Yes. Jannat, he has a friend called Ambika and two twins, which is fascinating, Rahu and Ketu. And I said, okay, these are the planets. And then she explains that Ketu comes from K2, the Everest peak, right? And Rahu is a short form for Rahul, which is pretty clever. And Jannat almost seems to be, because he grew up in Mumbai, like you, is that city kid, yeah, with the kind of childhood that you came from. And it's really interesting the way Jannat slowly kind of adapts to the mountain way of life, and starting with being a little reticent, a little fearful about parakeets even, animals. And Ravina shared with me that she grew up with a lot of fear because growing up in Mumbai, you weren't used to, the natural surroundings. And do you want to tell us a little about your childhood, Ravina?
Yeah, as you said, I grew up in Mumbai, and I grew up in an apartment complex. And, if you saw anything, even a lizard, I remember, caused us immense fright. It was talked about for days that there was a lizard in my house. It was, and we didn't grow up with understanding or identifying a lot of birds. There were people who had, dogs as pets or occasionally cats, but mostly we encountered them as strays. So I think growing up, at least in my family, we didn't have a huge love for the outdoors or nature, but we gazed at the ocean.
Right.
And I think in Mumbai, the ocean is something that, allows you to be beyond yourself. And
Yes.
if it wasn't for the ocean, I think as a city, we would go insane. But when you look at the horizon, that's so big, that's bigger than yourself, it allows
Limitless.
you to imagine
Yes, yeah.
other worlds, right? So in that sense, that is me. The book is about the tension, really. There's a child and his mother has taken him to live in the mountains where she's inherited a guest house. He doesn't want to leave his city and go to Dehradun. He doesn't want to do that. And so it's about the tension between mother and son, which dominates the book, understanding his mother. And for him to do that, he really has to understand the mountains. So it's about the space, the landscape. I think I try to create it as a character, understanding the mountains and getting more intimate with them through listening to the sounds of the mountains. I think that is a step into solving the mystery. Yeah.
Listening to the sound of the mountains and the sound of the birds. So birds, the title also says songbird. Beautiful descriptions of all kinds of birds who kind of fly in and out of the narrative. Where did they love that? You clearly have a passion for birds, Ravina. Was it something that when you moved to the mountains it developed? Or did it start from maybe the pigeons at the gateway of India? I don't know. No?
No, no, it started because in 2013, we built a house in Dehradun, and I happened to be staying in a guest house that was owned by very avid bird watchers, Bikram Grewal, who's written about birds. And all around me were these amazing birds. My cousin is a big, who had started, birding tourism in Uttarakhand. And so he kept pointing out the names of the species. So I don't know if a lot of you know, Uttarakhand, of course, has the highest number of bird species in the country. So it's, and Dehradun, even though it's a city and urbanizing very rapidly, has, if you do it on a bird count day, it listed the highest number of bird species, so almost 300. So there are these citizen scientists who go out, or bird watchers who go out and record the number of birds they see in a day. It's an indicator of the biodiversity there, an indicator of the bird species that are still surviving. And Dehradun ranks very, very high, and the highest. So I couldn't, in that landscape, I couldn't not be aware of birds, So I think that was the landscape evoked it, and then I became more serious about it. My husband, of course, has grown up in a family that's in the US that's very invested in birds. Uncles have been part of the Crane Foundation, the Audubon Society, and so he also found that love of coming back to him. And then my son got into it, and in fact, the bird that's on the cover of the book, the Indian Paradise flycatcher, is a beautiful, beautiful bird. That,
have you seen it?
Yes.
Wow.
It's a fairly common bird. It's not in that endangered list. But to see it for the first time, how many of you have seen it? How many of you have seen an Indian paradise? So
there are some there.
You know how stunning it is. The tail is just incredible. So
Talk about it as a ribbon, a white ribbon.
Yeah, exactly. So all there are 6 parts to the book, and each of them is named after a bird. And so a very pivotal moment in the book is when Jannat, also paradise, and the paradise flycatcher, so when they become, when he sets out on his own for the first time and in pursuit of the Indian paradise flycatcher. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
And actually for all of us who are so proud of our portraits of birds, we've gone, we've hunted, etc. It's a very interesting paragraph where, so she talks about this World Avian Conservation Society. And the president of that says, how many of you all in the audience, have cameras and you've taken you've got pictures of birds? And about 90 or 99% raise their hands. And he says, well, you are all bounty hunters. You're all killers. And they're all shocked. Ravina, I want you to tell them that why did you write that and what did you mean? It's quite clear there, but I think it's interesting to share.
So in the birding community, in the serious bird watching community, there are quite a few rifts in terms of technology, right? Technology use. Because there's one viewpoint that, the more you go out just taking photographs, that you're here to capture and check off a list, and you're capturing birds and you're disturbing them in their habitat. People will play bird sounds to attract birds so they can see them. They will, do kind of unethical and ruthless ways of getting to the bird nests and then try to be very exclusive so nobody else sees them. So, I mean, these are extreme.
No, and you said that they sometimes kill the eggs so that no one else can get that.
That's what the character says, and that's what I've heard from people who are very purists. In that sense, they denounce technology. So there are all kinds of risks. I've been to parks, even in the US, where one group of bird watchers won't talk to the other because one group uses technology and the other one is against it. So this is quite a bit of, you can say technology and photography have also evoked an interest in bird watching. Today, in the US at least, birding is considered to be one of the top sport, like if you look at backyard birding. And even in India, with people going out there to see birds is increasing. In Bombay itself, I would go out to Bhandup or areas where you can watch birds, and all kinds of, from students to, older retired people were all coming out to watch birds. And I think the interest is growing nationally. So we see this longing for nature. I think it captures that longing for nature in us, and this is growing exponentially. So I think how people view nature and their interaction to nature leads to different factions. And
No, absolutely. And I think the plot, this urban city kid, actually exploring, discovering himself and discovering the mysteries and beauties of the mountains, right? If I was a young reader, it would definitely ignite my interest and sensitize me more. And I'm sure that was part of what you want to do with the book, right?
Yeah. There's a part in the book, absolutely, Puneeta. There's a part in the book which having seen the mountains, right? We all are filled with the awe and the wonder, and the snow-capped mountains, of course, for those of us who come from hot areas, are very iconic, right? So you see everything, Kashmir is Switzerland, etc. So our imagination is these wonderful snow-capped mountains in the distance. And so in that sense, the book wants to create an intimacy with mountains, not only the high peaks or Everest out there, but also the mountains that one knows. And in order to do so, you have to understand nature, and you have to understand the mountains, but you also have to understand the people who live there. So it's a view of the environment that is not devoid of the people who live there. And community living means, and so here's where I move, of course, we've heard the critiques of Enid Blyton that, in her writing, there was a lot of, people who denounce her for saying that outsiders or people who belong to different classes were denigrated and were, made fun of. And how do you deal with a stratified society when you create a community, right? Because so I think the four friends who become friends come from different communities. So finding friendship together in a distant place is important to understand that. So I wanted to have something for, at least as a mother, for my child, when he understands India, it's not only an India of the community he comes in, but how do you find friendship across these boundaries that you are encountering? And second, how do you even go beyond that to understand caste, issues of caste? None of the, and particularly issues of caste dominate, and so who are the keepers of the sounds and who will we listen to? And I think this is something I tried to understand in the book. I know I heard John Key talking earlier as well, looking at if you think of the colonial period of writing and how they wrote about the Himalayas, and you see with the colonial period you had the hill stations, which then became places of health and recreation. You had the military cantonments. You had places of education and recreation, right?
Yeah,
like you would go away from the heat and dust of the plains and you would establish these spaces. But it wasn't so much about understanding local culture. It doesn't mean people didn't understand it. And then there's a second period in the 60s and 70s when the Beatles come to India, right? The Beatles came to Rishikesh, very near Dehradun. And when with them came this interest in the Himalaya and in transcendental meditation and in the Himalaya as a
Mahesh
place
Rishi,
to go backpacking in, to find yourself by outsiders. So my question to us today is, when kids from urban areas in India are moving to the hills, which has become a big thing, or moving to the mountains, what are we going to listen to? Is it just going to be our own, are we going to just impose our own cultures there, or how are we going to understand the mountains? And I think that's what I try to explore in the book.
Yeah, interesting, because, okay, I'm not trying to be a spoiler here, but the songbird, and it's in the very first page you get to know, the songbird is actually a woman who gets missing. And because she sings very beautifully, she's called Kastura also. Her real name is Shanti. And she had worked in the Beatles ashram. And I found that really interesting because when we were talking earlier, you spoke about the different songs belonging to different castes and the songs of the mountains. Yeah? And was it when you went to Dehradun that you became aware? Or was it earlier? Because, this thing about caste, song, and the fact that you've threaded in the Beatles and somewhere the blackbird comes into it. Would you like to tell us a little about that?
Yeah, Puneeta, thanks for asking me that question. So I don't know about you all when you write. I didn't set out, I knew I wanted to write a mystery. I knew I wanted it to be this kid who goes and all. I had some ideas in mind. And then it's something like your hands kind of write themselves. You've already been in a situation where you have these in your subconscious and in your experiences and in your knowledge that is evoked through the process of writing that you didn't necessarily plot out. Maybe when I write the second of the series, I will have a clearer plot in mind. So I didn't automatically plot it out, but Kastura the Songbird, who became the dominant character, I didn't set it out to be like that, came from a woman I knew in Ladakh who was called the Nightingale of Ladakh, Seshu Lamo, and she was a very major singer. She came from a very oppressed caste and a caste of singers who were itinerant, didn't have land, and went around singing, and that's how they made their living. But she was the most popular voice of Ladakh. And I think...
Like a gypsy, a traveling gypsy.
They were kind of, they wwere nomadic. They were considered, then the government gave them land and settled them, but they were very still stigmatized. But her music was not. So there was this discrepancy between who could sing and whose music we considered part of our heritage, but not the people. And I think she became the influence of this character. And I found this very common. If you look at, even in Rajasthan, if you explore communities who carry the legacy, who may not sing about their own, but who sing about the rulers, or who are the keepers of culture, they are allowed to sing it, but they're not allowed to enter those spaces. So I think she was a very important character in the book for me. So she became...
Are you all ready? You've got 3 minutes left, Ravina. Are you already thinking about your next book? You got some thoughts?
Yes, I do. I think I want to hear this. I think, so I'm not claiming to know a lot. This is my first novel. I struggled a lot with it because I don't understand. So I created it, and I created the opening for it to be a series, right? So I wrote it for a particular audience, and I think it's a young adult, middle grade audience. But the next story that's coming to me is Johnny's mother. Johnny is Jannat and his mother. And I want to write it. I don't want to change the place. I've created the place. I love it. I want to linger there. But now I want to switch to her story. And I've been told I shouldn't do that because that's like taking away from an audience you're already building and now shifting it to another demography. So I don't know what the right answer is. And if you guys know of good examples of this, please share with me. But I really want to write that. And every time I sit down to write, that's the next mystery that comes to me.
So the conflict here, I think a lot of women whose children have grown up, the conflict here is that Rehana and Arjuna are Jannat's parents. And they lived in Bombay, and now she has obviously come from Dehradun. So she's gone back, and she wants to now set up her life in Dehradun. Her husband doesn't want to leave the city. So it's about separation. This is where her heart is, in the mountains. The husband doesn't want to leave. the child feels he's being torn between. It clearly is a much more adult demographic that you're looking at here. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, no, I like looking at, I think children's literature can also deal with very complex subjects in the background, but I'm dealing with Rehana. I see the next mystery through her eyes very clearly. And I'm not able to get away from that and go back to one of the childhood characters. So I think the next story will be a mystery set in the same space, but from her perspective.
Wonderful, Rehana, and good luck. And thank you for this. Thank you. Do you have a question? Yeah.
What was your experience like being published for the first time?
I mean, I've not been published for the first time. I've been published, as a non-fiction, as an academic writer quite extensively. I think it was very humbling because there are, normally when I'm setting out to think of a non-fiction book, I get, even if I discuss it with some of the editors that I know, they're always like, give it to me, give it to me. So I've always been sought after. I've established a certain kind of credential as an academic writer. But fiction was very humbling. I got a lot of rejections. I had a great agent who couldn't sell my book. And I had a lovely publisher, thank you, Zuban, who believed in it. So I think, just believe in it and stick it out, and be humble about it. So I have a great respect for people who are fiction writers and who struggle with that. It's not easy.
How do you come? Thank you. I think